Hi everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Morris Animal Foundation's webinar series, Animal News 101, How 3,000 Golden Retrievers Are Giving Your Dog a Healthier Life. My name is Sean Anderson-Vai, Public Relations Associate Director here at the Foundation. Our goal with this series is to cover topics that are of interest to pet owners and animal lovers in general. We get a lot of questions about pet care and animal health here at Morris Animal Foundation. We hear you and want to share some of our knowledge with you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the partners and individuals that support our Golden Retriever Lifetime Study. They're listed at the bottom of this slide, and their generous support has been key to the long-term success of this groundbreaking study. Before I introduce our host, I want to go over some housekeeping items with you. There are buttons for questions, chat, and to raise your hand on the right side of the screen. If you have a question, please use the question button, but keep in mind we'll save all questions for the end of the webinar to keep things moving. We're aiming for it to run about 45 minutes with 10 or 15 minutes or so at the end for questions. Also, we can't answer specific veterinary questions about your pet. Please speak with your family veterinarian if you have any health concerns. I'll be monitoring questions behind the scenes, and if you have a technical question, I'll do my best to help you. We'll have a handful of polls throughout this webinar, and in the interest of time, we'll give everyone about 10 seconds to answer each one before I close them. We'll also send out a survey about this webinar later, and we'd love it if you would fill it out. Tell us what you liked and didn't like about it so we can better tailor future webinars to your needs. You can even help choose topics for the future. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out a link so you can watch it again if you'd like. Okay, with all that out of the way, I'd like to introduce your host, Dr. Kelly Deal, our Senior Director of Science and Communications. Dr. Deal received her Doctorate of Veterinary Medicine from the University of Tennessee and is a board-certified small animal internal medicine specialist. She was a practicing veterinarian for 25 years, including 14 years in private practice, before joining us here at the Foundation about 6 years ago. On to today's topic, the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study. So Dr. Deal, take it away.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks to everyone who's joined us today. I really appreciate you taking time to come and listen to this webinar on the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study, which is the second in our series of lectures, part of our Animal News 101 series. So again, thanks everyone for doing that. I'd like to introduce folks who may not know about Morris Animal Foundation to the Foundation and give you a brief introduction. Morris Animal Foundation was founded in 1948 to fund the best and most innovative research to improve the health of animals around the world. We fund studies focused on dogs and cats, obviously, but we also do horses and exotic pets, llamas, alpacas, and wildlife, so a very broad portfolio of studies. And we've invested more than $155 million in the time since our inception in more than 2,700 studies to help animals live longer, healthier lives. And that includes, of course, the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study. Before we start today, I'd like to launch our first poll, which is how many people have heard about this study or knew about us before signing up for the webinar? This is everyone's chance to learn how to do the polls. Wow, a lot of you guys have heard of us, almost 90%. Well, thanks for joining us today, and I hope you learn a little bit more about this fantastic study. So let's talk about the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study. It is the largest veterinary study of its kind in the United States, and a real unusual study even around the globe. And we're following 3,000 plus, a little over 3,000 golden retrievers throughout their lives. To give you a quick overview of what we're trying to accomplish with this particular study and how it can impact the health of your dog as well as other pets and maybe even people. We started it because we knew that we had some critical knowledge gaps on the incidence and particularly risk factors for a variety of diseases, especially cancer. It is modeled after the ongoing Framingham heart study, and the study is really a unique partnership between dog owners, the veterinarians who care for the dogs, and researchers. And what we learn, we are confident will have the potential to change veterinary and human medicine now and in the future. I'd like to take a slight detour and talk about the Framingham heart study that I just mentioned, because I think if you can understand a little bit about this study, it will help you understand a little bit of the whys and hows regarding the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study and how we set it up. So Framingham was started, ironically, the same year that Morris Animal Foundation came into being. It's 1948. At the time, it enrolled 1,500 adults, which was a third of the town. And it was repeated over time. It's a longitudinal study that is still actually ongoing. And people would fill out an annual questionnaire about their diet, lifestyle, and exercise, and of course, see their physician for a physical examination and collection of blood for analysis. And what Framingham taught us are things that I think all of us take for granted regarding the risk factors for heart disease, which included cigarette smoking, obviously lack of exercise, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure. And what's interesting is to realize that prior to Framingham, people thought maybe some of these factors were involved in heart disease, but they weren't sure, and in some cases didn't even think about it at all. For example, many people thought at the time that high blood pressure, which of course tends to be something that happens as we age, was in some instances just a normal part of aging. And we know that's not true now, right? High blood pressure is definitely a problem and it's not normal. The other thing that Framingham did is more than 2,500 studies came out of Framingham, meaning Framingham gave people ideas for other studies to dive deeper into some of these factors. So what can our 3,000 dogs do? Well, we believe they can really make an impact on the future of veterinary medicine. By the time the study is completed, we estimate that we will have 5 million, and that's million, data points. That includes biologic samples, so little tubes sitting in our biorepository, as well as answers to questions. Every time an owner answers a question, every time a veterinarian answers a question, that is a data point. So that's huge. That's a huge database that's very valuable to researchers. And we want to do a couple things. Obviously, we want to think about lifestyle choices that may influence the development of disease. We want to think about how our findings might change human medicine or other medicine for other species of animals, and also give veterinarians who are practicing some really concrete things that they can do to help their patients live a better life. And for us as dog owners, what can we do to really enhance the quality of life of our animals? What works and what doesn't work, right? I think we're all inundated with a lot of information, and sometimes it's well-founded and other times that information may not be very well-founded. We want to obviously share our data and samples with researchers so that they can, similar to Framingham, carry out new experiments and ask new questions based on our data. And we also wanted to be a model for other studies, and we're proud to say that we have helped in the creation of a couple other big longitudinal studies. People have looked to us and come to us for help in how do we accomplish something similar. And we're really, really proud of that. And that's how we're helping even right now move veterinary research ahead. We also have the opportunity with our samples and data to use kind of cutting edge technologies, and that can be anything from using, as computers become more powerful, we can actually look at these enormous data sets and make some sense out of them. We have when this study was conceived, we banked samples, sometimes not knowing what people would use them for in the future, but we did it anyway. And as technologies improve, people are now able to use those samples in ways we couldn't even conceive of when the study was first begun 8 years ago. Very briefly, I know some of you may be thinking, what is a longitudinal study or a cohort study? You're using these terms, and what exactly does it mean? Well, it's pretty straightforward. As you can imagine, you're just following a large group of patients. Usually you have some defined endpoints, and these patients just kind of live their lives, right? It is done in a prospective way, which means we're doing it in real time and getting answers in real time. Many of you probably are familiar with a retrospective study, which is maybe you have a question and you want to know about dogs with diabetes. And so you go to some kind of database and you say, give me all the dogs that were diabetic, and you look at them and you might compare that group with a group that didn't develop diabetes, and that's a retrospective study. Sometimes those types of studies can be biased, and you may have trouble figuring out, well, who do I include and who do I not include? And so the power of a prospective study is you eliminate some of those types of biases. It's really important to know the next two factors for a longitudinal study, because we get a lot of questions about this here at the foundation. Longitudinal studies are not randomized studies. Everybody and anybody who signed up and made it through our enrollment pipeline was allowed to join. So again, we don't want to do any kind of selection. We want to try to be as open as possible. And that brings us to the next problem or question we get a lot with our longitudinal study is we cannot intervene. We can't tell people in the study, hey, we think you should do this, or hey, we think you should do that. We can't do that. We can't tell people what to do. They need to consult with their veterinarian, and with their veterinarian, they make the best decisions. And that doesn't mean they may not change something over time based on evidence that's published in the veterinary literature, but we can't tell people what to do or advise them in any way. The problem up to now with longitudinal studies is they require a very, very large sample size for you to be able to make any conclusions. And obviously they can take a long time. I mean, Framingham is going into its 72nd year. Prior to probably the last couple decades, these kinds of studies were really difficult for people to pull off. But with the age of the internet and people becoming more computer savvy, we are seeing a lot of more longitudinal studies. Sometimes they just are asking people questions on a computer. And so with those changes in technology, we're seeing many, many, many more longitudinal studies, which is really, really cool. For the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study, and many of you probably know this, but there are 4 big factors that we want to look at when we're thinking about development of disease, right? And they kind of make sense, genetics being one of them. We know that certain diseases run in families. Obviously, we see it, we know there's a genetic underpinning for some diseases because we see certain diseases crop up in some breeds of dogs and not in others, and sometimes even in mixed breed dogs. So genetics are really, really important to disease development, but genetics alone don't explain a lot of development of disease, and that's where we get into our next 3 buckets, which include environment that these dogs live in, the diet or nutritional status of these dogs, and their lifestyle. So again, think back to Framingham and what questions they asked people, and you can see why these particular areas are of interest for us. I want to discuss a little bit about the different phases of the study, which first we began with recruitment, and we started with a pilot group of dogs in June of 2012, and then in August of 2012, we opened enrollment. We reached full enrollment in March of 2015. We wanted 3,000 golden retrievers, and the reason we selected golden retrievers were a couple of reasons. One, we were very, very interested in cancer risk factors, and unfortunately, even though they're wonderful, wonderful dogs, for all of you who have golden retrievers, you know that they have a high incidence of cancer compared to some other breeds of dogs. 3,000 also is a lot of dogs, so we needed to pick a breed where there are a lot of dogs. And we know that golden retrievers are really popular in the United States and actually around the world as a particular breed. And their owners are very, very interested in cancer. Many people, and I know there are people enrolled in the study listening to this, but when we ask people, why did you join the study? Many people tell us, it's because I've lost a dog, a golden retriever, to cancer, and it's really important to figure this out because it's such a devastating disease. So anyway, that was why we picked golden retrievers. We wanted them to be between 6 and 24 months of age. Obviously, we wanted to follow them from when they were really young. An interesting fact that many of you may not know, even those in the study, is that originally we had talked about not enrolling dogs till maybe they could be up to 4 or 5 years of age. But knowing what we know about early exposures in people with cancer, we decided that was too late to really understand potential exposures in young dogs and how that could influence disease. So we pushed the age of enrollment back to 6 to 24 months. We wanted diversity in reproductive status and geography, but again, because of the nature of a longitudinal study, we can't say, as people are enrolling, sorry, too many dogs from California, which is our #1 state as far as number of dogs. You got to stop enrolling. Nope, we just let people enroll. We're now past, obviously, the recruitment phase, and we're in the observational phase, which is kind of the long haul of the study. And we're following dogs every year, collecting samples. And our current defined endpoints are when we reach a cumulative number of 500 diagnoses in one of 4 key cancers, which is lymphoma, osteosarcoma, high-grade mast cell tumor, and hemangiosarcoma. Then we're going to have a conclusion phase where we're going to start wrapping up the study. We're obviously going to lose some dogs as they age out, and we haven't reached that point yet, but we figured that phase would start about 10 to 12 years from the beginning of the study. This is a cute little graphic I threw in here that just talks about our distribution of dogs. And you can see the little yellow dots where dogs are located. And obviously there are a lot in urban areas, but we got our high density population areas, but 60% of our dogs are like us. They're suburbanites. 30% are rural and 10% are city dogs. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the study endpoints, and we have what are called primary endpoints and secondary endpoints, and I'll review those. The primary endpoints are 4 cancers that are big problem in dogs, and they're common in golden retrievers, and they have some other similarity to human cancer. So I'm going to kind of parse this out and spend some time here. Hemangiosarcoma is a cancer we primarily see in dogs. It affects some breeds more than others, typically larger breed dogs. But they it can also affect other breeds of dogs. Cats will sometimes get hemangiosarcoma, but it's very rare. And in people, angiosarcoma is somewhat similar, but not the same. So this is one cancer that's a very important cancer in dogs that we're interested in, although it may not have any comparative aspects necessarily to other species or people. The next cancer we're interested in is lymphoma, which is the most common cancer seen in dogs and cats. Its human analog is non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which some people are probably familiar with. So this is one type of cancer that not only is a problem in dogs, but also another species, cats, and also in people. And we're very interested in lymphoma. In the next one, is osteosarcoma, which is a tumor of the bone. It is the most common primary bone tumor in dogs, and approximately 10,000 dogs each year are diagnosed with osteosarcoma. It's common in golden retrievers, but even more common in some giant breed dogs. And so dogs that tend to be bigger in stature and growing sometimes rapidly. However, we do see it in smaller breed dogs. So this is a cancer that, again, kind of covers a lot of different breeds of dog. We don't see it very much in cats. Interestingly, and very importantly, osteosarcoma in dogs and how it behaves and how it arises looks very similar to osteosarcoma in adolescent children. Again, think of kids, preteen, adolescent, growing rapidly. And it's a very serious problem in these kids. About 800 kids a year are diagnosed with this particular type of cancer. And we know from decades, at least 2 decades of research right now, is that dogs are an extremely good model for this particular form of human cancer. Finally, our last cancer is another one that's very common in dogs. It's mast cell tumor. And mast cell tumors are kind of weird. We're mostly interested as a primary endpoint in high-grade mast cell tumors. These are tumors that are very aggressive. They're very difficult to treat in dogs. We can see mast cell a variant in cats. It's not very common, but we do see it. But there are also low-grade mast cell tumors, and we're collecting information on those as well. People get mast cell tumors, but they're quite different. So this is a cancer that's not quite something that we would be interested in a human analog, but it is a big problem in dogs and somewhat of a problem in cats. We have a bunch of secondary endpoints, some of which are really specific kind of to golden retrievers. So if you own a golden retriever, you know that hypothyroidism is a particular problem in the breed, and they tend to be kind of allergic dogs. We do see heart failure in them, and that's one of our secondary endpoints. Epilepsy is a growing problem in golden retrievers, although it affects many, many breeds of dogs. Hip dysplasia, I think a lot of folks, if you've ever owned any breed of dog, it is a problem, usually in larger breed, middle-sized to larger breed dogs. Mixed breed dogs can have it as well. Renal failure, which we were seeing at the time of the study, a little bit of increase in golden retrievers. I'm going to hop back up to the top because sometimes people go, seriously? Mortality is a secondary endpoint? And it is, and we're tracking it, but remember, it's diagnoses that we're primarily interested in cancer, though mortality for any reason is a secondary endpoint. Recurrence of any one of the primary tumors is considered a secondary endpoint. And we're watching everything, and we're keeping track of all diseases every year in these dogs. And what we're going to do is also focus down, we keep a tally of everything, is look at any condition with an incidence of 4% or greater in our cohort, because that's a red flag. Like, wait, we thought, you know, these diseases were going to be important, but look at this disease over here, what's going on? So again, that's going to be something that either we'll look at or a researcher will look at more closely. Just to tell you, because you might be interested, our cohort's kind of young. Their average age is a little over 7. But so far, the disease that we see most frequently and most frequently reported in our dogs or condition is otitis externa, which is ear infections. And again, if you know golden retrievers, they get a lot of ear infections. Some of them are related to allergies, some are related to the swimming. They have those big, heavy ears. So not a surprise for people who own a golden retriever that that may be the most common condition we have tracked so far. So who's in our cohort? Well, let's meet our cohort. We have 3,044 dogs and just under 3,000 owner participants. So if you do the math, you can realize some people have more than one dog in the study, which is interesting to us, right? Some of those are siblings, some of them are not. And so how, like genetics, you know, the environment's the same, but maybe the genetics are different. And how is that going to look? We have 2,000 veterinarians. So again, doing the math, you know that there are a lot of veterinarians out there taking care of more than one dog. And our winner for veterinarians is Dr. Mike Lappin. And I saw that Dr. Lappin has joined us today, and he wins for most patients in the study. And last time, the number that I got was 18. A lot of dogs, including his. So kudos to all of our veterinarians, though. We have veterinarians all over the country who are caring for these dogs, and it is a heavy lift. I'm going to show you in a few minutes what the veterinarians and owners have to do every year. The good news was, after allowing for open enrollment, we got at least one dog in each of the lower 48 states and an equal distribution in 5 geographic regions. And those regions are the Northeast, the South, the Midwest, the Rocky Mountain region, and the Pacific coast. The reason we excluded Alaska and Hawaii, even though we always said we wanted desperately to go do some visits out there to, just see how the dogs were doing, is not because we want to be exclusionary, but because some of our samples need to be shipped overnight on ice or frozen. And the cost for doing that and the difficulty in getting stuff to our biobank in 24 hours was just a little too much logistically for us to work out for those states. We also lucked out when in our cohort that we had even distribution by sex and reproductive status. Now, again, at baseline, we had an even number of dogs that were intact males, neutered males, intact females, and spayed females at the time of enrollment. Now, you can imagine over time, some of those younger dogs that may have been intact when they enrolled were spayed and neutered. And we're seeing more being spayed and neutered. Some dogs were used for breeding, and as they age, they've become spayed and neutered as well. We also have 1,200 and a little over 1,200 dogs that are siblings. So there are 1,200 dogs that have one or more siblings in the study. Again, kind of like a twin study in people, right? Where we have some dogs that are siblings that live in the same household and some dogs that are siblings that are in different households, which is really actually great for epidemiology and looking at statistics of how the environment, lifestyle, and diet then in dogs that have similar genetics would influence disease. I'm going to talk very briefly about data collection. And I know that there are folks out there who are in the study, so you can take a little break right now, but we have people who every year they go in for an annual exam. They have to take their dog in. We collect biological samples, and those samples are blood, urine, feces, hair, and nails. We do that every year that the dog comes in, whether they're had an illness or not. We have questionnaires completed both by the owners and the study veterinarians. And if a dog develops cancer, as we mentioned, this is an important endpoint and something we're desperately interested in. We have tissue samples of the tumors collected where appropriate. We also collect all those samples I just mentioned. They get collected again at the time of a cancer diagnosis for storage. This is a graphic representation of the giant questionnaire that owners have to do every year. Doesn't matter if things haven't changed, they fill these out. They put down very precise information. We'll talk about that in a second because I'm going to give you guys a chance to answer some of the questions that the owners are faced with every year. So I'm going to ask Sean to launch our second poll right now. And this is a question, right, from the questionnaire. What type of water bowl do you use for your dog or pet? And you get to pick one. So it's your primary type of water bowl that your dog drinks out of. So it doesn't count if you go on a hike and you've got one of those travel ones. Wow. So I think everybody can see a lot of metal bowls. I have both metal and ceramic for my dog, plastic much less, and other less. So thanks for filling that out. Moving on, I just want to show you the veterinary questionnaire, equally extensive. Some of the questions overlap with the owners, but most do not. The veterinarians are focused more on looking at their records and discussing the medical conditions of the dog, many medications they prescribed over a year, any endpoints that or conditions that aren't an endpoint. Of course, if there's a cancer detected, we actually ask the veterinarians to fill out an additional questionnaire when they're diagnosed. And of course, as I mentioned, we have folks come in and supply additional samples for us. But again, this is where a veterinarian would talk about vaccinations. They would talk about any medications that were described. Maybe the dog had diarrhea sometime during the year. Maybe he threw up a little bit. So it doesn't have to be a serious condition, but every bit of data is collected. I'm going to ask you some questions in a minute, but I wanted to go over some sample questions so that you guys can understand the level of detail that we ask. We ask people all about the diet, and we all ask, does your dog eat vegetables? If yes, a menu comes up and you get to pick what vegetables. So let's say you say, my dog eats bell peppers. We even ask you then, what color of bell peppers? People have to estimate how often a dog would eat a bell pepper. How many times? How much do you give your dog when you do give them bell peppers? So you can see a lot of detail. We ask, about exercise. One of the questions we ask is, does your dog swim? And if so, what is the water temperature? And you might think, well, why do you care? We do ask where they swim: ocean, pond, if you're my dog, the drainage ditch, all as much detail. But the water temperature speaks a little bit to metabolic energy expenditures. You tend to expend more energy if you're in cold water than warm water. We talked about environment. We are really interested in where these dogs live. And we ask people, what's the primary floor covering in your house, and how much time does your dog spend on it? We ask, about other flooring in the house. If you visit a second house and the dog spends any length of time there, what kind of flooring is there? Same with primary cooking fuels. Again, trying to get at environmental exposures. Lastly, the obvious one, is your dog exposed to pesticides or herbicides? We have people record that, and we ask them about the environment where they live. Do your neighbors spray the lawn? You may not know what it is. You could ask them and add it, or you can at least say, yes, I know that my neighbor gets a grass treatment every summer from here to here. Again, we're trying to get as detailed information as we can and as precise information as we can. So I'm going to ask Sean to launch our third poll and then the fourth poll once we get an answer. And you guys will get another chance to look at some of the questions we ask our cohort. The first one is about supplements. And I bet you there are a lot of people who use supplements. This is one of the most common things that we see in our cohort, for arthritis in particular. And it's about a 50-50 split, and that may depend on how old your dog is, or maybe they've moved past supplements, right, and they need something stronger. So let's launch our fourth and last poll for you guys. Another question from the study. Is your dog a therapy dog? This speaks to a couple different areas. One is activity, lifestyle, and also potential exposures to different diseases, to quite different environments. And about 25% of people do have a therapy dog. It's becoming more common, right? And but again, it's an exposure of interest. It's not in any way judgmental, but again, we're trying to get a lot of detail on these particular individuals. So I'll give you a few updates, and we'll move then into, okay, well, this is all nice, but what data are we getting that can actually help people? As of June 15th, we have had 100 dogs withdrawn from the study. And the good news for not the dogs, but for us, is many of these withdrawals were not because people didn't like the study or couldn't, just got lazy about doing it. A lot of the withdrawals were due to people who we had unfortunately several owners pass, and the new owner was not really ready to take on the responsibility of the study. We've had a few people move. Some lucky dogs actually moved to Alaska and Hawaii and were withdrawn from the study. But we do have 221 deceased dogs, and we're seeing an acceleration in that. When I first made this slide up, which was on May 15th, we had 211. So we lost 10 dogs in 1 month. Not unexpected as our cohort ages. Cancer outcomes, again, part of the reason I decided to update these stats is we've had many dogs, unfortunately, and we're seeing an acceleration of dogs dying from cancer. We've had 56 dogs diagnosed with lymphoma and 45 deaths. Those other dogs are in treatment right now. We've had only 5 high-grade mast cell tumors, 57 hemangiosarcomas, which for many of you, that's a particularly devastating cancer that often kills dogs very quickly, sometimes before they even can seek veterinary care. And we've had 46 deaths, including 1 this week already. And we've had 5 osteosarcomas with 1 death. So the other 4 osteosarcoma dogs are receiving treatment. If you look at the graph on the left side, you'll see that we have 44 deaths due to other cancers, and we're watching those very closely. You'll recall that we're interested in outcomes that affect 4% or more of the cohort, and of course, we're always interested in malignant cancers, and we've had several dogs diagnosed with histiocytic sarcoma, another very aggressive cancer known to affect golden retrievers, but we have more histiocytic sarcoma diagnoses, about 12 right now, and that exceeds both the high-grade mast cell tumors and osteosarcomas. So a little surprised that we weren't anticipating, but again, we're tracking those dogs carefully. We've had 82 other deaths and a variety. In our young dogs, unfortunately, trauma was one of the primary reasons that dogs died when they're younger. We are not seeing as many traumas as a cause of death in our older dogs. This graph, I know, is a little bit confusing, but I'm going to walk everybody through it. Along the bottom, you'll see calendar year, and the left side of the graph is what we've observed so far. So, you'll see it goes from white to gray on the left and right side as we move to 2020, right where we're at right now. And basically that blue line is the first big steep increase is as we were enrolling dogs. So we enroll a bunch of dogs, we hit just over 3,000, and then we're starting to decline. And you can see that over time, that decline is going to get steeper and steeper and faster as our dogs age, which is completely expected. The orange line is an estimate based on our experience and actuarial tables. There are such things in dogs, and some of these estimates were based on a study that came out of the Golden Retriever Club of America. And what we anticipate now, based on our current rate of diagnoses, is that we will hit our primary endpoint diagnoses sometime around 2023, so that 500 of those 4 cancers of interest, not counting the other cancers. And you can see the gray line above the orange line kind of parallels as we expect more deaths from disease and particularly our cancer deaths over time. So I told you we got 5 million anticipated samples and data points, and our samples are stored at a biorepository that is what they do, and they do a fantastic job. And we have our samples in freezers and different types of locations there where they're very, very carefully monitored. But it's a lot of samples. We pay for those samples. So as we get more samples, we pay for more money. And we also knew, like, okay, these samples sitting in freezers are not doing anyone any good. So we're going to start thinking about what questions might we answer in the cohort as it stands. We may be a little far from some of our cancer research, but there's lots of other studies and lots of other things we can do. And so we've started to give samples and data to researchers who come to us with a really solid proposal. They have to have their own funding to do the research, but then we help them with data and give samples and data to them for free. And we've got a couple of these studies which we call nested studies because they're nested within the larger study of the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study. And one of them is at the University of California, Davis. I know if there are Golden Retriever owners listening, you may know Dr. Josh Stern. Dr. Stern is a cardiologist, and I think everyone knows of the turmoil of a few years ago when there was a big uptick in dogs developing heart disease who were being fed certain diets. Those diets, the acronym is BEG, B-E-G, B for boutique, E for exotic ingredients, G for grain-free diets. There was a lot of controversy and uncertainty about it, but it was quite clear, again, the FDA was getting a lot of complaints about this, and Dr. Stern was one of the first people who really looked hard at this particular question. And one of the factors that was implicated was that the heart disease was developing secondary to taurine deficiency, which is an amino acid. Dogs can make some taurine, but there seem to be genetic variations in how much taurine a dog can make on their own. And so there may be dogs that need more taurine in their diet than others. For some dogs, taurine doesn't seem to be linked to the development of the disease, but eating these certain diets is. Just a quick sidebar, the reason we focused on taurine is about 33 years ago, it was shown that cats developed a form of heart disease called dilated cardiomyopathy when they ate diets that were taurine deficient. All cat diets are now supplemented with that. Cats can't make taurine. And the disease was just about wiped out of the cat population. We used to see it before 1987, and after 1988, 89, it was gone. So that's why when dogs started to develop what looked like a diet-related dilated cardiomyopathy, a very specific form of heart disease, that people started to focus on taurine and why it's still interesting. And he's looking at that. He's looking at some of our dogs who developed heart disease and were eating these diets, some dogs that didn't develop heart disease but were eating these diets as indicated in the questionnaires. And he's trying to kind of piece together, how does this picture look? Is it genetics? Is it not genetics? How early could it start? How fast does it develop? We're also have a study going on in the United Kingdom by Dr. Eleanor Raffin. And Dr. Raffin is looking for a genetic link to obesity in golden retrievers. And many of you, if you own Labrador retrievers, may know that a few years back, Dr. Raffin found a genetic link between a certain mutation in the DNA of Labrador retrievers and the development of obesity. So Eleanor came to us and asked, hey, I'd like to do the same in golden retrievers and kind of look at this, and she's working on that now. We also have 3 training grants that we gave to residents. I don't want to call them baby researchers, but young researchers who wanted to learn more about how do you look at a giant data set and make sense of it? How does that happen? And they submitted grants looking at the data. They're not looking at samples, but they're looking at test results and trying to answer different questions. One is looking at parasites, one is looking at feeding raw diets and how does that change maybe blood work results. So they're doing some really interesting studies, but the main point of those, the help we gave them was really to help train residents and young researchers on how to do good research. The last study that's currently in progress is looking at the gut microbiome, something as a gastroenterologist that I find absolutely fascinating, so poop stuff. And we know, and you can't, escape hearing about the microbiome and how the bacteria and viruses and archaea and fungi who live and have evolved with us in our gut influence disease, everything from what goes on in our brain to what goes on in our urinary tract and influence our immune system. So pretty wide-ranging effects. We have a researcher right here at the University of Colorado, Denver, who is a microbiome researcher, and he was really interested in looking at the difference in the microbiomes between lean and overweight or obese dogs in our cohort. Dr. Chris Miller is the researcher, and Chris is interested because there are links in people, but it's a little sketchy. And the question is, you know, do the bugs influence the obesity, or do you get obese and then the bugs change? And Chris is trying to sort some of that out in our dogs. So stay tuned on all of those. Some of them should be wrapping up within the next year. We do have 2 recent publications, and I want to spend some time here because I know some of you are going, okay, well, what does this have to do with my dog? And we did publish something last July, and it's available on our website, about the timing of spaying and neutering and the development of obesity, overweight, and orthopedic injury. And our epidemiologist at the time, Dr. Missy Simpson, said, okay, I've got all these dogs that are young dogs. How can I look at them and maybe come to some conclusions? And she picked a particularly fraught and controversial subject, which is the timing of spaying and neutering. I think all of us realize that pet overpopulation is a problem. And probably 30 years ago, people started to think about, well, maybe if I could spay and neuter youngsters, right? Maybe before they even go through a heat cycle, that I can help with the pet population problem. And there's no question that spaying and neutering dogs helps with pet population, right? But about a decade ago, people started to question, well, is it a one-size-fits-all kind of recommendation? I can remember when I was in practice and as a pet owner, I was told, well, you know, do it under 6 months of age, right? And I did that faithfully. But then I heard from particularly the orthopedic surgeons who started talking about, well, maybe some big breed dogs need a little bit more time with our hormones till they reach maturity before we spay and neuter them. And the question was particularly what was known as non-orthopedic or non-traumatic orthopedic injury, meaning it's not your dog got hit by a car. It means that they had some kind of injury, typically a ruptured cruciate ligament. And there was some thought in the community that depending on when you spayed and neutered, particularly large breed dogs who take longer to mature, that it might influence the development of this injury. In addition, I can remember back, I don't want to say how old I am, but a long time ago, I remember our veterinarian telling my parents and me, oh, when you spay and neuter, boy, they get fat, right? Animals get fat. We had cats, and cats are going to get fat. And so that question is still around, right? Is spay and neuter predispose dogs to orthopedic injury and obesity or being overweight? And so Dr. Simpson analyzed this, and she looked at 4 different groups: dogs that were spayed or neutered under 6 months of age in our cohort, dogs that were spayed and neutered between 6 months and 12 months of age, and then dogs that were spayed or neutered over 12 months of age. The 4th group were dogs that were intact. And she looked at the incidence, trying to rule out other factors such as a lot of exercise, or if they had a disease or something that might preclude them from exercising. And what she found was that indeed, timing of the spay and neuter affected both overweight and obesity and orthopedic injury. It didn't matter when you spayed or neutered your dog, they had a higher incidence of being overweight or obese. So that's under 6 months, between 6 and 12 months, or over 12 months of age when compared with their intact control group. However, for orthopedic injury, it only mattered if they were spayed or neutered under 6 months of age. If they were spayed or neutered between 6 and 12 months or over 12 months, they did not have a higher incidence of non-traumatic orthopedic injury than intact dogs. So, you know, we advise people to talk with their veterinarian because there are other lifestyle factors that might influence the timing of spaying or neutering your dog, but it certainly added to the conversation. It has not been without controversy, but we're happy to at least be able to use our study to make a suggestion and bring evidence to a veterinarian who can then balance that evidence with the needs of a patient and an owner to make the best decision for a particular dog. The other publication came out of a group from Cornell in conjunction with Embark, which is kind of one of those companies that's like a 23andMe for dogs. And they looked at DNA that we provided on dogs. They wanted to look at inbreeding coefficient and litter size. And I think all of us could say, well, probably the more inbred a male and female are closely related, that should maybe have a negative influence, and indeed it does actually, but they were able to quantify it using DNA, which is a first. Prior to that, people had only had pedigree data that they relied on an owner to give them, but using DNA, they were able to more precisely look at this, and that's another paper available on our website. So wrapping up quickly, this year we'll be celebrating our 8th anniversary and starting our 9th year. We're really excited because the next year is going to be heavily focused on genetics. We are working with new partners to look in more depth at the genetics of our dogs. Again, technology is getting better all the time, and costs for doing sequencing, if you've ever heard of people sequencing their genomes, you can do it for about $1,000. We're going to be able to do that more cost effectively in our dogs. We also started a rolling grant proposal so we can process grants and requests more quickly, again, to try to spur more research. And we've been getting out there and talking as much as we can to researchers about what we have and what we can do to help them. And we're also going to be started for all of you listening, and if you have golden retrievers, and if those golden retrievers happen to be over 12 or 13 years of age, and we're going to be starting a golden oldies project. And the reason to do this is we're going to be looking at the DNA of older dogs, where we're going to be recruiting them to supply samples. And part of the reason is we need a control group now for the dogs in our study that have cancer. We're really, really interested in looking at cancer. As you can see, we're getting more and more dogs, and we're getting to numbers that we can actually do something with it. However, if we wanted to get controls from our own cohort, we've got to wait till dogs reach 12 or 13 years of age with no cancer. We typically then can say they're probably going to be cancer-free, and that means waiting 4 or 5 more years. And so what we decided to do, and this was the brainchild of our, we have a postdoctoral fellow in epidemiology, is to find dogs that we can use as our control group now. And we're going to start this Golden Oldies project. Stay tuned and check out our website, because we'll be recruiting dogs sometime in either late July or early August for this project. So if you have an older dog and maybe you missed out on they were too old for the study at the time, but you want to participate, we'll have more information about that. So to end with, we want to know, how can 3,000 golden retrievers really make a difference for other dogs and people? And one is, as I've already mentioned, we're really starting to be able to get publications out, because we have enough numbers and enough data and enough time to be able to make some associations. And we can see that with the inbreeding study, as well as the study that came out from internally here about non-traumatic orthopedic injury and spay neuter and the whole overweight obese question. And we're hoping, as we mentioned at the beginning, that some of our findings will not only help golden retrievers, but if you think of it in concentric circles, we know that we're going to find data that will likely be applicable to golden retrievers, right? And for example, the spay neuter, maybe what we found is really most applicable to golden retrievers, but could help other dogs. But we also are looking at, as I mentioned, cancers that are not just in golden retrievers, they affect other dogs. And then you get further out and you say, well, we're looking at things that affect other species of animals. And then if you get even further out, you think about what we may learn about people. We know dogs are like us, right? Dogs and humans are 85% genetically identical, so we're pretty close. And there are about 400 diseases in dogs, both species, right, that dogs naturally develop, and that's key. Dogs share our environment. They go where we go. We tend to take them places, right? I don't take my cats any place, but I do take my dog places, and she accompanies me all over. The other thing with dogs, and we're talking cancer, but it applies to other diseases as well, is they develop the diseases spontaneously, which is really, really important, right? You're not inducing a disease in a rodent. Rodents are still used a lot in research, but I think people are realizing that dogs living their lives with us and developing diseases are a much better model for a lot of things. And as I mentioned, we're already generating some findings that we're getting out there, as much as we can to inform all veterinarians, not just veterinarians in our cohort. I'm going to ask Sean to pop back in now, and we will try in the last few minutes that we have, sorry that I went over, to answer questions that you guys might have about the study. Again, I can't really answer any specific questions about a specific condition in your pet, but I'm happy to talk about anything in the study that may have been confusing or anything else you want to know.
Sure. Okay, Kelly, so first question is, can you speak to genetic markers and/or indicators found in animal blood samples that show why cancers have killed heroes in this study?
That is a really good question, and that is what we're tackling now. And because biomarkers, that idea of a blood biopsy, that's a big question out there, right? Could we detect something early, right? That's another key point. A biomarker might be available. And right now we are looking at a proposal that is proposing to do just that, but it's in its early review stages. And we are going to tackle some of that. And that speaks to the Golden Oldies project, where we're looking for cancer-free older dogs to get the genetics on them to be compared to the dogs that we have with cancer. So we're going to look at them first at a genetic level, right? Can we identify a mutation that maybe is, oh, this variant is associated with hemangiosarcoma, and we need to look at that. And then the next will be to see if we can maybe find, is that something that may circulate in the blood or just be in DNA, and you just do a DNA test like they do for us, for example, for BRCA1 in women as a breast cancer risk. So we're getting there, and we're getting really close. That's going to be our next big project over the next 12 months is really get that rolling.
Okay. The second question is, so you do not control the diet that the dogs receive?
Correct. We do not control the diet that the dogs receive. People keep detailed records, and they can change as much as they want as long as they let us know, but we do not influence that.
Okay. How many cancer deaths were treated versus non-treated?
Ooh, that is a hard question for me to answer. As you can tell from the past slide, a lot of people elect to treat their dogs, and we have some data on who did and who didn't. Some people go maybe one round of chemotherapy and they stop. We have, unfortunately, a lot of dogs that died and never got to the point where they could even receive treatment. But I appreciate the question, but I can't answer that specifically.
Okay. Another one that might fall along that same lines. What is the incidence of melanoma and the outcomes among dogs in this study?
That's a good question. I am going to spitball a little here and say that I don't know if we even have any melanoma diagnoses. None that pop off the top of my head, though I think we might have one or two. It has not been a cancer we have seen very frequently. However, it's still malignant cancer that we're interested in, but it is surprisingly not very common in our cohort. So far, anyway.
Okay. This next one is, are any researchers who are researching human cancers using any of the data for studies?
Good question. Right now we haven't been approached specifically by any human physicians. However, there are some commercial companies that are interested in looking at some of our dog data and samples as it relates to developing tests for people. So those are in the works right now. We are trying really, really hard to get the word out there in the human medical community to let them know, hey, we got this stuff. And we took a big step in that direction last year. You may have noticed that the V Foundation, which is a human cancer research foundation, is one of our partners. And last year we were able to, they have a topic each year that they focus and fundraise around. And last year was comparative oncology, because they recognized that dogs are pretty good models for human disease. That was a big boost for us because it got word out to human cancer researchers about the study. And Dr. Rod Page, who is the principal investigator of our Golden Retriever Lifetime Study, he has also been out speaking at human conferences to let people know what we have and what we're doing with our study.
Okay. As well, you know, Kelly, we just hit noon. I'm not sure how many, and we have quite a bit more questions, but I'm not sure how many you want to answer in this webinar time we have.
Right. Why don't we do a couple more, Sean, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
Two more.
All right. So from the number, two more.
Yeah, two more.
For the number of study dogs that have passed, are you seeing a significant number who participate in the necropsy, and is it providing valuable information?
Thank you. Yes, we have really increased in the number of people who elect for a necropsy when their dog dies. And we're seeing more and more people opt in for that. We appreciate it. Those are tough for a lot of people to do. They have to take their dog. We have to have veterinarians who are willing to do it. But we are collecting data, and what we're collecting is samples, because when we do full necropsy, we are able to collect a lot more samples on a dog. However, we're also having, I want to couch that by saying we have a lot of folks, we've kind of tapered what we need from a necropsy down to a few critical tissues, and many veterinarians can do that in 15-20 minutes in their office, and we guide them through that, and we're seeing many poor people do it. Our biobank is getting many more tumor samples, which is phenomenally good, and we appreciate people for doing that.
Okay. And this woman is asking, because she's lost 2 Goldens at the age of 9, has the life expectancy of Goldens decreased significantly in the last 20 years?
That is a really good question, and I have asked that of Dr. Rod Page. Rod is, a world-renowned veterinary oncologist, and I asked him that one time. I said, I get this, I used to get it all the time in practice. Is it because we're better at diagnosing these dogs? Is it because dogs live older, longer lives because they're not getting hit by cars, they're not dying of infectious disease, right? Because we vaccinate them and their lifestyles are really different. Are they really dying early or not? His thought, as of about 2 years ago, was no. He did not think that dogs were living shorter lifespans. However, I'm going to couch that statement in saying that is one of the things we are really interested in looking at in our Golden Retrievers, because we have data from around the world and Golden Retrievers in different regions that we can then compare to. So I think that's it. So I'm going to let Sean finish up here. And thanks everyone for joining.
Mm-hmm. So yes, again, thanks everyone for joining us. We are recording the session, and we'll be sending out a link here in the next few days, hopefully, with the webinar to review it again or share with your friends to get some questions answered. So please, thank you. Please join us for some future webinars, and please take our survey to help us kind of tailor the needs of future webcasts or webinars for your needs as well. So Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. And I'm going to put in a plug for following us on social media, and we have a podcast, so tune into our podcast too.